First of all, before we started, I wanted to thank Dr. Wallace for joining us because he is taking time out of his day and out of his research and out of whatever he's doing to come on and talk to me about his research in riverine microplastics. Dr. Wallace, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Clayton. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to start everything off by asking you about your research of microplastics in riverine systems.
Well, you know, it's funny because I got into it basically because one of my former students is becoming a leader in this field. And she came here to Millersville to give a talk, give a seminar. And I started thinking, hey, you know, we ought to collaborate on a project. And so this was I think 2.5 years ago. And so I thought, well, you know, what I can do is I collaborate with Stroud Water Research Center on things. And I thought, well, I know they have data. I know they have macroinvertebrate samples for 40, 50 years. And I thought, well, what if we tied in? I know of a project they have in the Schuylkill watershed,
Okay.
where they're looking at land use effects on water quality. And I thought, well, I bet you they have their macroinvertebrate samples pickled away in jars and cabinets. And so I talked to the guy there, John Jackson, and I said, hey, you know, how about if we collaborate on a project? Well, then I talked to Ray McNesh, who I think you've spoken with. And so Ray's collaborating. And so we started this project looking at the effects of land use on microplastic abundance and diversity in not in the water, but in the macroinvertebrates. We didn't know if we'd even find it in the insects. And sure enough, we did. And we presented the data for the first time. And we're looking at it from a 3-decade span, 1999, 2010, and 2019. And from samples from those 3 years. And we've got samples from forested land use, agricultural, and urban. And we've found microplastics probably in about, if we're talking about macroinvertebrates and you count worms and things like, you know, non-insects, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 different families of macroinvertebrates. And not only that, but we've been finding it not just in the larvae, but in the pupae, which is kind of exciting in one sense, but in another, disturbing.
Okay, yeah.
And that means that the microplastics are being transferred, what we call transstadially. So it goes from the larva to the pupa. What we don't know is if it goes to the adult. Okay, and so we're going to have a 30-year time span where we'll have a very good comparison of what's going on with microplastic type and microplastic abundance in these macroinvertebrates as a function of land use. That's one project. That's the first one. And another one has to do with looking at drinking water. And now, unfortunately, I think I mentioned to you before that the student took her samples home when we all went home for COVID-19, and her data, and she didn't have time to transcribe it to the computer, and a water pipe broke in her basement and ruined everything. So she lost everything. So we've got to start from scratch. But I can tell you that we were finding microplastics and she was comparing building in Millersville University. She was looking at building age and water fountain type influence on microplastics. And so I can tell you that we were finding that in these in old and new buildings, and in old and new water fountains. New fountains would have filters on it.
Yeah.
So that's another project. Another project we're looking at is a project that's a spinoff from an EcoEvo research project. And so we're looking at originally we wanted to know how were storms impacting microplastic abundance in streams. So it's kind of connecting the Stroud project, which is looking at macroinvertebrates with land use, and now we're looking at storms and looking at the effect of land use on storm events and microplastic abundance in the streams. So what we're doing is we're sampling streams at base flow when it's not storming, right? And getting a readout on what the microplastic levels are like there. And then we sample right at peak flow. You know, if you think of a storm hydrograph, remember that from EcoEvo? Okay, so yeah, so when you think of a storm hydrograph, a storm event happens, and the runoff, the amount of time that the runoff takes to get to the stream varies with land use. In an urban environment, it peaks very quickly, but in a forest environment, it takes a long time. The storm event lasts a long time, and so what we're finding is, and we found that storms events in urban areas contributed more microplastics to the streams. The add-on to that project is now we're looking at the rainwater itself. A study was published back last summer which found microplastics in rainfall in the Rocky Mountains. Yeah. So now what we're doing is we're collecting the rainfall itself, and we're collecting the stream water before and after storm events. That's the next project. The last project is looking at how microplastics might move in with regards to trophic levels. So we're working with mosquitoes, and we're feeding mosquito larvae microplastics, and then we soon will be feeding those adult mosquitoes to adult predators to determine if, in fact, microplastics can move from an aquatic to a terrestrial environment that way through the prey item, through the predator-prey interaction. Okay. That's the set of projects that my lab is working on.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back on that last thing, were you looking at from like between trophic levels through like kind of like something like bioaccumulation or like biomagnification, and
right,
how it transcribes through each system? Okay.
So Ray has been looking at fish. Okay. Well, you just put the puzzle together. We've already found it in macroinvertebrates. Ray has found it in fish. Okay. We found it in the water, right? And where's it coming from? It's coming from the land. Yeah. Right. If you look at you know, some of the review studies that talk about microplastics in the environment, and you know, 92% of all plastic that's ever been produced is still out there. Right. And if you look at, say, from the somewhere around the late 1950s to now, there's been 8.3 billion metric tons of microplastic produced. Right. Well. Yeah. Well. Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, 30% of that is still in use. Okay. A little more than half of that has been discarded, so it's still out there in the environment. It's just been discarded. And believe it or not, only about 6% of that 8.3 billion metric tons has been recycled. So the question is here, you know, we're finding microplastics in all kinds of organisms. You know, there's all kinds of studies that have found them in algae, in protists, you know, and in snails, in honeybees, in honeybee comb, you know, is pervasive. The question is, you know, how much of it is getting to us?
Yeah. I think I was looking at a study, and per year, humans who regularly eat seafood are ingesting 11,000 pieces of microplastic, most of it being I forget.
Fiber.
Yeah, most of it being fiber.
Yeah. Well, fiber. So what your followers have to understand is that, you know, microplastics are, you know, anything up to 5 millimeters, you know, in size. But that also means, you know, things that are, you know, almost nano sized too. Yeah. And the thing is that I don't, you know, that's an extrapolated number, but, you know, if you do eat a lot of seafood, you may be ingesting a lot of microplastics. The question is, where is it ending up? You know, if you think about this, you know, it sounds a little macabre, But if you look at a drowning victim, right, and someone drowns in a lake, right? Well, they ingest water and it goes into their lungs, and their heart pumps it around. Well, where do you find diatoms in an autopsy? You find them in the lungs, in the major vessels, and sometimes you find them in other major organs like the brain.
Okay.
So the question is, and that's a diatom, that's a unicellular alga. So the question is, when you're ingesting these microplastics, where do they end up? Not to mention the fact that, a lot of them are made of substances that are carcinogenic, that are endocrine disrupting, affecting your endocrine system. So I'm not so much of a skeptic on that number. The fact is that this stuff we are ingesting it.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a study that's found it in human feces.
Cool. Okay.
Did you read that?
I didn't. I haven't read that one yet.
I think I have seen something where that's been found.
Okay. Just to hurry it along, because I think we only have like 40 minutes. And
Okay.
I think we're running down to like 6 minutes left.
Okay.
I'll ask 2 questions, and then I'll just leave it to you, and you can answer your choice, I guess. So I know these plastics, when they decompose, they're not really decomposing, but they're breaking down.
Yeah.
They're leaching pollutants into the water column. What type of major concerns does it come with plastic leaching these chemicals into the water columns? And do you know of any type of adaptive management type things in place for headwaters?
For headwaters.
Like just headwater streams.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's look at pollutants or toxins. So plastics are made of different things, obviously derived from oil, but if you've ever heard of BPA or phthalates, all right, I think BPA makes plastic transparent, and phthalates makes plastic flexible.
Mm-hmm.
These are major components in a number of different types of plastic. You think about it, water bottles, whatever, PVC pipe. You look at styrofoam, fleece jackets.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, but BPA and phthalates are known endocrine disrupting chemicals. And we have had a problem in the Susquehanna River with fish exhibiting endocrine disrupting health issues, where sexual tissue gets changed. And one of the things we're looking at is how these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and this is not related to microplastics, by the way, but this is another issue. But we're looking at how these EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, are affecting tree swallows. And so, for example, if you have a tree swallow that has ingested a lot of EDC, and it makes a male function more like a female tree swallow, well, then you have males that are not singing and getting mates.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that their fitness goes down, and that's going to affect them evolutionarily. It may influence their song. And so there's some issues there with regards to ecological and, more importantly, evolutionary impacts that these toxins may be having on wildlife and other organisms. As far as adaptive management, I think the only, I've seen places where they've put up nets to try and collect plastic from stormwater pipes. You're not going to collect the stuff that's 2-3 millimeters big, but that stuff, if you collect the big stuff, hopefully, through abrasion and streams and things like that, they don't break up. You do have an impact, but I'm not aware of anything that's widespread, especially in headwaters. But if you want to think about it, okay, that's headwaters are the lifeblood to any riverine system. And if you mess up the headwaters, you're going to mess up the bigger rivers. Okay.
I do say in this video that consider headwaters, like if you're looking at it at the human circulatory system, headwaters are the smaller capillaries to our arteries and veins.
Exactly. Exactly. And so whether you're looking at mountaintop mining or fracking or whatever, any kind of impact on these smaller streams is going to have a magnified impact downriver.
Yeah.
Right. Or nutrient loading, whatever it is. So if you want to, do something about microplastics, protect the headwaters in general.
Okay.
Don't deforest them. Keep riparian buffers. Keep the plastics from being washed in. Those are things that we can do.
Yeah.
But we're not right now.
Yeah. Well, I think we have about a minute left before we hit our 40-minute mark, I think.
Good timing.
But I wanted to thank you so much for doing this again. I'm sorry I screwed it up the first time. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I just didn't get any audio. But thank you for coming on and talking to me about this, because it is a big issue, and it's nice to have an expert who's been doing these type of studies come on and talk about it.
Well, Clayton, it's been a pleasure. It's always fun talking with you, and I wish you all the luck with this, with your work in this area.
I wish you all the luck with your research in Montana.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Have a nice day. I'll see you later.